Let's now move on to understanding special contracts. These are contracts that are specifically defined under the Indian Contract Act 1872. They are special for the simple reason is that they are categorization of the kind or type of contract. And the Indian Contract Act 1872 in Part 2, if I could say so, talks about contracts such as bailment, pledge, indemnity, guarantee, and agency. And these are in terms of the fact that the statute defines who the parties to these contracts are. The statute also talks about the rights and obligation between the parties. And in case there are certain special rights and obligation, those are something that are defined in this chapter. You will notice that time and again in modern context, when you make certain kinds of contract, the principles of these special contracts as stated in 1872 are applied. I can give you one instance or an example. For example, in India, we do not have a law on joint ventures. And hence, very often than not, when joint venture contracts are being made, this question has always arisen of whether the partners in a joint venture are agents of each other. And will the principle of agency will apply in those circumstances. Take another instance of what we call as the franchisee contracts. Again, you will notice there is no law on franchisee. These are modern, contemporary style of contracting, outsourcing sometimes. So there are different, contracts that are made from time to time. And the Indian Contract Act has not been amended, or there is not too many special laws on contracts which have defined the obligation. So somewhere, some of these contracts may fit into the old scheme of things. Or they may, just look at normal contractual relationship that we have spoken so far. So let's now understand the first type of contract called bailment. This is defined under Section 148 of the Indian Contract Act. Bailment is a very important type of contract. For the simple reason is today, if you look at carriage, you would have a carrier of, say, goods by air, sea, and road. All of these carriages carry goods, and they are interestingly covered under contract of bailment. Now, interestingly, when you talk about carriage by road, it could include a truck that is carrying goods, or it could include the Indian Railways as well, which has acknowledged that it's obligated under the contract of bailment. Though there is a specific statute called the Railways Act, which defines the obligation between the railways and its customers. Now, in contract of bailment, what is important, friends, is that there is delivery of goods from one person to another. That is from the bailer, who is supposed to be the owner of the goods, to the bailee, who is supposed to take these goods for certain purposes. Now, those purposes could be transportation. It could be for redesigning or refurbishing the goods. For example, one of the ordinary examples of bailment is giving your automobile or car for servicing, right? You give it for a temporary purpose. On the completion of that purpose, the goods are to be returned back. So this is a typical case of bailment where temporary possession is handed over, and once the purpose is accomplished, it should be given back. Interestingly, safekeeping of goods, say keeping the goods in a warehouse or in a cloakroom, is also a contract of bailment. So we entered into many of these contracts on a day-to-day basis, where our goods are kept with someone else, and he probably deals with the goods, and after dealing with the goods, he returns it back. All of these will be covered under the contract of bailment, right? And you will notice that in contract of bailment, very importantly, it's only movable property that can be the subject matter of bailment. And when you talk about movable property, you will say that it is goods per se, because that is how Section 148 deals with goods. And what is goods is also an interesting characteristic that we must understand in these circumstances. Because if you talk about goods, friends, the definition of goods is not there under the contract law. And hence, we have to go to the definition of goods under the Sale of Goods Act of 1930. Now, Section 2, Subclass 7 of the Sale of Goods Act defines goods. And these kinds of goods would mean, friends, please note, it could mean cattle, it could mean crops, it can mean water, It can mean so many other things which are movable property, but it does not include cash. So money and cash, again, there is a distinction sometimes being made. And hence, when you deposit cash in a bank, this is again for safekeeping, right? You want the bank to actually take care of it. Unfortunately, cash cannot be considered as bailment because it's not covered under rules. Further, when you deposit cash, the kind of numbers on the notes that you deposit and the return that you get back is not the same number of notes. So you get the money that you have taken, which you have deposited, that money you can get back, but not the same goods. So in bailment, what you have given, mostly the same goods with increment is going to be returned back. So cash in a bank is not considered as bailment. However, the interesting question with bailment is about a clock room or a locker facility in a bank. Now, a locker facility in a bank is some kind of a contract which we often consider as a contract in which there is some kind of responsibility of the banker. But the contents of the locker are not delivered to the bank. The contents of the locker are something that you keep it on your own, though you are given the facility of the locker. So sometimes bailment is very close to something called hire. Now, we must understand that as a customer, you have hired the service of the banker's locker. But it is not bailment because there is no delivery. See, delivery can be of a couple of factors. One, you can say it's actual delivery, where physically the goods are handed over. Or second, it can be constructive delivery as well. Constructive delivery is when you deliver the goods, with the title of the goods. You don't have to give the physical possession. You can give the control of the goods. It's like giving the key to the warehouse. That's constructive delivery. And then there is delivery of attornment. Now, attornment means where someone else is already in possession of the goods, and from there you actually start bailment. So that is what attornment means. So someone who is already in possession is then asked to continue the possession under contract of bailment. That would become delivery by attornment, right? So if we magnify the contract of bailment into several circumstances, you will notice that aircraft also have to be serviced, so they are also under the contract of bailment. Ships may also have to be serviced; they are also contract of bailment. So these are certain very interesting facets about where and all the contract of bailment comes into existence, and how the provisions of the Indian Contract Act will apply in defining the relationship between the bailer, who is actually the owner of the goods, to the bailee, to whom the goods have been delivered temporarily. Right. Now, one of the interesting facets of special contracts is there could be special conditions to these contracts. Now, the general rule you will notice is that without any consideration, there can be a contract. However, in special contracts, there can be an exception to the same rule. And what are these exceptions, friends? The exceptions are that in the contract of bailment, because we say the contract law is based on the law of obligation and not necessarily just based on consideration, there is this introduction of provisions of law on what we call as gratuitous bailment. Friends, gratuitous bailment means it is not a bailment for reward. It is not a bailment for consideration. It's some kind of a bailment in which two parties, out of, say, friendship, love and relationship, out of any other persistent kind of relationship that is of a neighbor or of family members, the goods are handed over to you without any expectation of compensation, right? And you will notice that because there is no expectation of compensation in these cases, it is gratuitous in nature. Gratuitous means it is out of charity, it is out of gratitude, it is about not expectation of a reward. It's not some kind of a professional service. It is out of consideration of love and affection that such a contract of bailment comes into existence. One of the classic illustrations that I can share with you is that let's assume that you are my neighbor and you want to borrow my car to go and pick up your mother from the railway station or from the airport. Now, in these circumstances, if I lend you my car to you to go and pick up your mother, I'm not a professional car lending agency. Now, professional car lending agency can also give you the car, and that is a contract of bailment for reward. Like you have Hertz rental car or Zoom rental car or DriveZ. So these are professional rental cars in which probably you are the bailee. you come to the car owner, and you want the car to be delivered. So, you pick up the car and you take the car for a particular purpose that you want to fulfill a journey, and then after fulfilling the journey, you come and return the car back. Right? So this is how interestingly you could enter into a contract of bailment with a professional car rental service. At the same time, you should also note, friends, that a valet parking is a contract of bailment. Yeah, because you are handing over the possession of the car, the keys is granted to valet parking. But if you are parking in a place like a mall or in a designated place in a hotel or in a parking area, it's not bailment because you have not handed over the possession of the car. It is only just a license to park. Right? So these are certain things that we must clearly understand. However, gratuitous bailment is where two neighbors are sharing the car for a particular purpose. Now, interestingly, friends, I am not expecting any direct reward. I don't have conditions of saying this is how much you should give it to me. No such conditions are mentioned, and I hand over this car to you to go and pick up your mother from the railway station or airport. Now, if I lend this car to you, friends, the contract law clearly stipulates that, look, this is a gratuitous bailment. This is not for reward, it's okay. It's not for consideration, it's okay. And it also says that you who has borrowed this car will have to take care of the car as if the car is your own. So there is a duty, there is an obligation casted upon you, because this is a contract of bailment, and bailment can be beyond just the reward and consideration. And hence, if you fail to take care of the car, if you fail to take care of the goods, then you could be held liable for a breach of the contract of bailment. So gratuitous bailment or implied bailment, voluntary bailment are also bailments for which the Indian contract law recognizes those obligations and also makes the other party entitled to get remedies as well. So, how do you define the aspect of taking care of the goods? You will notice that you have to take care of the goods as if the goods are of your own. And you will also notice that it is important that if you, while driving this car, were negligent, and if I am able to prove the same, then I can actually hold you responsible or accountable as well. Secondly, please note, in gratuitous bailment, we also say that as the owner of the car, I am also duty bound to lend that car which is safe for your purpose. Just because it's gratuitous, I cannot put your life at risk. So I must know whether the car is responsible for a journey, whether it has any prior defects. So I also have a duty to disclose the faults in the goods, and you have a duty not to be negligent in taking the car and getting it back as well. So gratuitous bailment is the most interesting aspect of the contract of bailment, because it places contracts beyond just consideration and reward, and it makes these contracts contracts that are enforceable by law, even if there is no consideration that is forthcoming between the parties. So, in this case of Mafat versus Bateman, a carriage was given gratuitously, and when it was given, unfortunately, it was not examined. While this carriage was lent gratuitously during the journey, unfortunately, the carriage met with an accident, because the bolts of the carriage, this is 1869, so the transportation by carriage was the only means, and this led to, of course, some kind of an injury to the person who had borrowed the carriage. Now, interestingly, what the law says is that the bailer, either in a contract of bailment for reward, that is with consideration, or in gratuitous bailment, the bailer should have a responsibility to disclose the faults in the goods. This is an obligation, this is a duty that is casted on the bailer. Now, why is this duty casted? Is because if you're handing over goods to, say, your service station engineer, and this is your car, naturally, you are duty bound to hand over these goods or transfer the possession of the goods. It is for your purpose finally, right? He has to service and give it back to him. But you have a duty and obligation to ensure that while he is using that car, while he is using the goods, it does not cause any injury to either him or to his property. So this is what the contract law states, that you are duty bound to disclose the faults in the goods. However, the difference over here is whether you knew the faults, and if you know the faults, did you decide not to disclose? Right? So you will notice that in gratuitous bailment and in bailment for reward, the distinction is that in gratuitous bailment you have to disclose the faults that you had knowledge of, right? Whereas in a bailment for reward, you are duty bound to disclose this irrespective of the fact whether you have knowledge or not, because you cannot infringe the rights of the bailee, and you cannot cause any kind of injury to him or to his property. So the knowledge becomes only a critical factor in this case, because when I'm lending my car to you, if I knew the car is not safe, I'm duty bound to tell you. But if I didn't know about it, because I'm giving it out of love and affection, because I'm lending it under friendship, I cannot be held responsible for negligence for not disclosing the faults in the goods. That's the only difference that we see. Whereas in all other forms of bailment, if the bailee suffers injury while using your goods, or that injury is caused to his property, and because your goods were not safe, then the bailer owes a responsibility of compensating the bailee as well. So, apart from gratuitous bailment, there are different other kinds of bailment, which we say bailment for money advance. What is bailment for money advance? It is a kind of a bailment in which goods are kept as security with, say, a banker, or goods can be kept as security with, say, a finance company. Say you want to take a gold loan. Now, gold is goods. It can be pledged. It can be kept as security, and you will get a money or you will get a loan advance. Please note, pledge is a very interesting combination of bailment and the lending business. So, pledge is essentially having an essential part of bailment, right? Because in pledge you can only have goods as security. So, what can be bailed in pledge? Shares can be kept as pledge, and it can be bailed as well, or any other valuable security that the bank or the financial institution is agreeing to keep as security. You can go ahead and pledge it. So, bailment is also something that you have to understand can benefit both the parties. In some cases, bailment benefits only one party, but in some cases, bailment benefits both the parties. For example, when you go to a bank and you pledge, see, the bank is also going to earn from the money that is given to you with the interest, so it is beneficial to the banker. It is also beneficial to you because you are getting loan as well. So this is a unique bailment that benefits both the parties. However, in gratuitous bailment, please understand, this is going to be a bailment that is only beneficial to the bailee, because he is going to take the car, he is going to get his mom. So it is one that benefits only one party, that is the bailee to the contract. In certain kinds of bailment, it only benefits the bailer. Right? That's how we see certain three categories of the kind of bailment. Something that benefits both the parties, some contracts that benefit only either the bailer or the bailee. Bailment for reward is when both the parties are in a commercial relationship and they expect compensation, they expect honorarium, they expect some kind of a charge. That is when bailment for reward is understood. However, one should understand that when you give your house to a tenant as a landlord, this is not bailment. Do we know why? For the simple reason is that house is an immobile property and it's not covered under the contract of bailment. Right? But in that house, if you keep your baggage and you expect the landlord or the tenant to take care of that baggage till probably 1 week you come back, then that kind of baggage that is kept in the landlord's house can be considered as bailment. Right? Bailment for hire of goods and services. Friends, hiring of goods and services is another type and kind of bailment. The goods are hired, right? Now, hiring and bailment are two different things. Now, for example, if you go in the Ola and Uber car, please note it's not bailment. Why? Because the goods are not delivered to you, it's not in your possession, and after the use, you are not returning it back at all. In Uber and Ola kind of services, you are taking the service on hire. It's driven by a driver. You just sit in that, you take the goods or the car for hire, you have paid the hire charges, whatever is the taxi charges, and then you get off the car. So the car is not handed over to you. So this is a typical higher kind of services, the higher kind of services could be in many other circumstances as well, and hence they don't fall within the categorization of bailment. However, if you hire a rent a car service where you are given the key, you are the driver, you can drive the car, say between two cities, then those cases where you are given the car, the control of the car is handed over to you for a particular purpose, those cars can be contract of bailment, right? So, for example, we say I've hired the Indian Railways for the transportation of goods. Friends, you are not only hired, but you are also handed over the possession of goods to the Indian Railways. In those circumstances, it's a bailment contract. But if you just want to hire, for example, I need a JCB or a crane to excavate my land. There was a very interesting case of an elephant that was asked for, moving of timber. Now, when you talk about a JCB or a crane or an elephant, if you are given the crane and the control of the crane is with you and you are operating the crane, then it is bailment. But if the crane or the JCB or the elephant comes with the mahout or with the driver, and they come and do the service over there and leave, then it is a hire service, not a bailment service. Right? So that is how the categorization of hire contracts and bailment contracts is generally being made. Finally, you will notice, friends, in India, we did have what is known as the Hire Purchase Act of 1972. Interestingly, it was not enacted or not brought into force because there were issues of taxation, there was issues of challenges of commerce, and that's why most states did not encourage hire purchase contracts. But hire purchase contract is kind of a bailment contract. Now, what is a hire purchase contract? Friends, hire purchase contracts were typical like this, that you can go to an electronic shop and you want to buy a washing machine or a TV, you get into a hire purchase contract. So the goods are handed over to you immediately, right? You have to give a down payment, and then the rest of the price or consideration of that electronic goods, you will say, I will give it in 6 or 12 installments, right? It is the EMI kind of a contract. Please note, the goods are handed over to you. There is a possession that is transferred to you, but there is no sale or title that is transferred to you, right? When will the sale or the title transfer to you in a hire purchase contract? Only after you pay the 12th installment, right? Once the 6th or the 12th installment or the EMI is paid, then the goods become yours, you become the owner. Till then, the goods are on bailment, right? So that's the whole reason why hire purchase transactions are also bailment contracts. Another important aspect that one would want to consider is government bailment. Now, government, as I told you earlier, say the Indian Railways can be the bailee. You could hand over the goods to the railways to be transported from destination A to destination B. Equally, you would notice that during the time Air India was with the government, if the Air India airline was transporting cargo, you would definitely say it's carriage of goods by air. We could also consider that there was a bailment transaction. So government government is into business. Government has warehouses. They belong to the Food Corporation of India. Government has a lot of businesses in which bailment can be definitely inferred. Apart from that, you will notice that we have the Port Authority of India and the port trusts that are there in different ports, cities of this country, and goods are actually handed over there in the port so that it can be loaded onto the ship. So whenever these port trusts are actually dealing with these goods, interestingly, they would be covered under the aspect of bailment contract, unless also, the point is, in many of these cases, there are also statutes that govern this kind of a relationship, but the basic law that we refer to usually is the contract of bailment. We also have government banks that actually take security of goods for a loan advance, and hence, even in those circumstances, a bailment contract can also be inferred. But interestingly, one of the issues that has been raised is this state of Gujarat versus Memon Haji Hassan case of 1967. And the interesting point that was raised in this case is, the government, when it enters into commercial transaction, a contract of bailment is definitely something that you can infer. Commercial contract, right? Business bailment is definitely there with the government. But suppose the government, through its agencies like, say, the Customs Department or the Police Department or the Income Tax Department, exercises what is known as the police power of the state and decides to seize certain goods. Now, the police seizes a two-wheeler because it does not have license. 1.1. Point 2 is you will have the Income Tax Department actually seizing and sealing certain kinds of properties, or the Enforcement Directorate doing the same, or the Customs Department actually trying to seize goods that are not declared or goods that are smuggled. Now, when these departments of the government exercise their power of seizure towards these goods, can a contract of bailment be inferred? Right? Now, usually we say that these are sovereign powers, these are police powers, because the power of search and seizure is sovereign, it's not commercial. Interestingly, when goods are seized, there is no consent, right? It's not a contract, you don't hand it over, it's not delivery of possession, it's not voluntary. And because of all of these, you do not want to infer a contract of bailment in such cases, right? This is point 1. Point 2 is, you will notice that the courts, as I told you in the past when I was dealing with quasi-contracts, I did say that they do want to impose the law of obligation through the contract law, especially when it comes to the government. I did tell you about income tax refund in quasi-contracts as one such example. Second, I think it's about the intention of the court is to make the government more accountable and responsible to citizens' interests and rights, and to hold government having some kind of an obligation in law. And hence, in the state of Gujarat versus Memon Haji Hassan case, the court, said, look, the aspect of gratuitous bailment, right? Gratuitous bailment is not for reward. It is done out of gratuitous character, which means if someone else's goods comes to you, how does it come? Either it is given to you, or it comes to you as a finder of lost goods because you have found someone else's lost goods, or it has been forcefully acquired. Right? In any of these circumstances, I think the duty and the obligation is very simple in gratuitous bailment is please take care of the goods as if the goods were your own. That's a simple duty and an obligation that can be imposed under bailment transactions. And the court said, despite the fact that you cannot create commerce, trade, and contract in such circumstances, I think it's important to impose that obligation of the government. And if the government fails to take care of the goods, because finally tomorrow you would want to release the goods, you would want to get a court order to get the custody of the goods back, and probably you want to enjoy the benefits of the goods, because when these goods are seized, the government does not become the owner. The government is having the temporary possession of the goods. They can actually forfeit it later point of time and make a sale. That's a different issue. But finally, if it is to be returned back to the consumers, customers, and citizens, then the government till that point of time should have taken care of the goods as a bailee, is what the court had to say in this particular case. So from the time of 1967, I think the opinion of the judiciary was very clear that the government owes obligations under bailment, both when it does commerce as a normal bailee, and gratuitous when it is exercising sovereign and police functions of the state, because finally what we are speaking about is contract law is only a branch of the laws of obligation, and the government owes an obligation, whether it is by pure contract or whether it is by quasi-contract or whether it is based on the principles of equity and justice, where the government owes this responsibility to the final consumer. So that creates a very interesting dimension to government bailment. And what you should also notice in government contracts, sometimes we have seen, say, when works contract is made or any other contract is made, the worker has left certain material in the government premises. Now, the government can take control of that material. It can sell the material as a finder of lost goods, but it has an obligation towards the final owner as well. So the government can deal with someone else's property, but they have to deal it with care and caution. The principal rules of bailment can apply to the way they have dealt with those goods as well. The next point of discussion is to understand the distinction between bailment and sale. Why is this distinction important for us to appreciate and understand? Is because very often they're not contracts. The judges would go by the intention of the parties. And hence, if the intention is one of bailment, the court will bring the application of the chapter on bailment in the terms of rights and duties and obligations of the party. So, Section 148 of the Indian Contract Act would be ready to. But if the intention is of sale, then probably the Sale of Goods Act and any other law for the time being in force will be probably read into to determine the rights and duties of the parties. However, very often than not, the issues on bailment or sale are also misused in terms of the intention of the parties, because the parties may deliberately intend to deceive taxation law. They may want to, refer or express that intention in a manner that is different, so that they can avoid certain kinds of tax to the government. And hence, in those circumstances, instead of allowing the intention of the parties to be prevalent, the court will have to look at the facts of the case, the material circumstances in the transaction, and then conclude whether it is one of sale or one of bailment. So we usually say that the courts determine such kinds of transactions on one, based on whether it's an issue of fact or whether it's an issue of law, or is it a mixed question of issue of law and issue of fact. Now, let's take this instance of say a Pepsi bottle. Now, when you buy Pepsi, it is given to you in a container or a bottle. The biggest question that has arisen in many of the cases is whether the bottle or the container is sold along with the containers. So it is container plus content. Okay. Are both sold to you, or is it only the content that is sold to you and not the container? Now, one would think, why is this relevant and important? It is because of the fact that, generally when you buy a bottle of Pepsi in a glass bottle, in any shop, retail shop, the ordinary rule is that you actually return the bottle back. It's not that one Pepsi that is available in a tin. It's not Pepsi that is available in a plastic container. It's that Pepsi that I'm talking about, which is given to you in a glass container. So you have to return the bottle back, right? There is a duty and an obligation. So can we say that the bottle that was given to you is one bailment because it was given to you on a particular purpose? It was not with an intention to sell it. Only delivery of possession, not delivery of title, is made, right? Similarly, when it comes to liquor bottles or breweries, or like the case of Kalyani Breweries, there are three cases, friends, in this case, if I recollect. One is called the Britannia Industries case, the other is called the United Breweries case, and the third is the Kalyani Breweries case. And these were cases that were decided by the courts in trying to understand whether the container or the bottle in which these drinks are given or these contents are given, can it also be the subject matter of sale? Now, why did companies argue that it was bailment? They argued it was bailment because, they have to fix the price of the bottle. And the price of the bottle is price of the container plus price of the content. That would be the price on which sales tax will be imposed. So there was kind of an allegation from the state sales tax department that these guys are deliberately not including the price of the container, and that is not being attracted or added into sales tax, right? That valuation is not got into determination of sales tax, and thereby the state is losing on revenue and taxation because the intention has been now reflected as a bailment, not a sale. So, based on that allegation, I think the matters came to the court, and the court had to decide two things. It's not only an issue of fact, but an issue of law as well, because you have to apply sales tax to a sale, not to a bailment, and you have to determine whether this is sale or bailment first, based on facts, and then apply the law accordingly, right? So, generally what happens with breweries is, I think initially they did come to this suggestion saying that we expect the bottles to be returned back. And when they return this bottle back, we can reduce the cost, keep the cost less. We can recycle the bottles, reuse the bottle, recap it, and then give it to the customers. And that is the reason we are saying it is bailment. Plus, they also said, look, we have a small deposit that we take from these retailers. Once they return the bottles back, the deposit is safe. If they don't return a few bottles back from the deposit, we forfeit a particular kind of an amount, and hence it is bailment, because there is this firm duty to return the bottle back. There is a firm understanding to return the bottles back. So they did argue that the containers or the bottles are a part of bailment. However, the courts did consider this fact that overall, it is not only the retailer's role, but it is also the customer's role. Do the customers have an option to return the bottle back? Yes, but is it mandatory for them to return the bottle? That would be the real, test to determine whether it is one of sale or one of bailment. Now, very often than not, some customers take it to their home. Some drink it there and return it back. So there is no consistency of these bottles and the containers, right? Yes, to keep the cost less, people may be encouraged to return. But that's not a mandatory rule, and unless it's a mandatory rule, bailment cannot come into existence. So to set things into place, I think what the courts did was they said that it is better to say that the containers and the contents both are to be considered for the sale price on which sales tax can be imposed. The aspects that they were on bailment cannot be considered, and hence this is a transaction of sale and not bailment. So I think what this case really highlights is the conditions of bailment are very, very important. And one of the essential conditions on bailment is there would be delivery of goods for a certain purpose. On the completion of that purpose, there is a mandatory duty to return the goods back to the dealer. If the duty to return back the goods is not mandatory, it is obligatory or an optional basis, then it would not be considered to be bailment. So I think that test is a test that under section 148 we have to complete, we have to fulfill for a bailment transaction to come into existence. Interestingly, today many of what is given under bailment is a service, like a automobile being given on service, and hence we have a new form of taxation apart from sales tax called the service tax, and hence the government, which is the central government in this case, because service tax is something that goes to the central government, is able to tax this kind of a contract not as sales but as service tax as well. So that's some kind of a settled position right now. Anyway, there is taxation, but the intention of bailment is that there is no transfer of title or ownership, whereas in a sale there is transfer of possession plus there is a transfer of ownership or title as well. That is what sale actually means, right? Bailment does not include the second part of ownership or title transfer as the case is. Next, going on to understanding another very important factor is the distinction between bailment and trust. Since trusts are of different kind, you can have a private trust, you can have a public trust or a public charitable trust, and when trust is created, you actually give the property, which is both movable as well as immobile, to a trustee who actually is supposed to manage the property on behalf of the beneficiaries, and that's what trust property is all about. Now, trust looks like bailment, but it's not bailment because for the simple reason is that a trustee can actually exercise sale. He can actually transfer the property in favor of some third party. He is given that kind of authority or right to deal with the property. And he can act as an agent on behalf of the beneficiary and make a sale to some third parties. Right? So, trust is like bailment in one sense that you get hold of someone else's property for some purpose, but you don't return it necessarily back to them. That is not a mandatory condition. So on the other side, please note, bailment is also a trust in terms of the fact that the bailer entrusts the property to the bailee, and he hopes that the bailee will return the goods back. So both of these are two different kind of transactions dealt under two different legislations, but I think there is an interconnection of the responsibilities and the principles that these two contracts actually